Allow me to quote my next guest. Pessimism is ubiquitous throughout the Western world as the pressing issues of massive debt, high unemployment, and anemic economic growth divide the populace into warring political camps. Right and left-wing ideologues talk past each other, with neither side admitting the other has any good ideas. The time has come to silence this left versus right shouting match, this dialogue of the deaf once and for all. Impossible? No. My guest is economist Dr. Woody Brock. He's the author of the new book, American Gridlock, Why the Right and Left Are Both Wrong, Common Sense 101 Solutions to the Economic Crisis. Welcome to the show, Dr. Brock.
Thank you very much.
Let's get into this idea of this dialogue of the deaf. I love that phrase. What is that dialogue of the deaf between the left and the right?
Well, the concept of the deaf is basically that whether you're, quote, left-wing or right-wing, Wall Street Journal versus New York Times, MSNBC versus Fox News, they're both deaf in the sense that they never change their position. They don't hear anyone else. They don't learn that actually parts of their views are wrong and need to be modified, and that the other side may actually have something to be said that's good. So I call them the deaf, and they're both deaf, so it's a dialogue. It's a shouting match between these extremes, as I said, MSNBC versus Fox News.
You know, the thing that strikes me when you say that, though, is you're talking about commercial enterprises, and they're in the business of stirring things up to get advertisers. But let's get down to the grassroots, whether it's the Tea Party versus some liberals. I mean, they don't really have a commercial agenda. Are they also deaf?
They're playing to each other, and they are deaf. And they're deaf for several reasons. And the purpose of the book was basically to say the following. You're going to be deaf if, say, under the issue, say, of health care, you have a view and the other side has a view. And it's either or. That is, it's my way or the highway. So no matter whether you're Tea Party or whatever, you have very strong views. You agree that entitlements have to be solved or they have to be scaled back. But you believe the rich should be taxed. So the people on the other side who don't agree say, no, we don't want to be taxed. We think it's entitlements that have to be scaled back, that more poor people suffer. So it's as true in a way at the level of what you call the political groups as it is in the media that plays to them.
No matter what other points are made that may represent common sense, they're not going to listen because it would disturb their position and their access to power the way they see it?
Pretty much, and the result, which is what the people listening care about, is the 79% of the Americans polled who say that the greatest problem the nation faces is that Washington is broken, that nothing gets done, there's no compromise. Mm-hmm. You see it in these budget deadline things where you go to the last minute and the country's going to not pay its bills, and then there's some sort of last-minute compromise, but even that only lasts for 8 months. So yes, it's everywhere the same story.
How do we put an end to this shouting match?
There are two ways. The first is to do what I've done in this book. And this is not at all an obvious point. It is to show that there are solutions to problems like this lost decade that we're living in, or how do we save Medicare and Social Security, or what do we do to prevent perfect financial storms of the kind that brought the country down in the last 4 years. These big issues, there are answers that transcend, that is, that rise above the entire left-right debate. That is, there are new solutions that are win-win, positive sum, so to speak, and that therefore everybody should want to adopt. That is how you do it. You show that solutions exist. This is what I was trained to do. It is not easy to do. Second thing you do is, having shown that there are win-win strategies, which is the role of my book, then you do things whereby you get the media involved, you put the heat on the politicians, and I've basically proposed a new game of gotcha to be developed at Harvard, whereby the media goes after politicians not for their sexual peccadillos or financial scandals, but for their idiocy quotients. That is to say, grading these people in Washington with a score that's published on the Internet showing how much their policies are going to cost their children in the way of jobs and income. So you elevate the level of debate above and beyond sexual and financial peccadillos to their public policy outrages as they support policies that do nothing but further mortgage the future of our children.
The book is American Gridlock, Why the Right and Left Are Both Wrong, Common Sense 101 Solutions to the Economic Crisis. My guest is Dr. Woody Brock, author of this new book. Give me an example, Woody, of specifically what would be one area where common sense could be used to break this deafening stalemate.
Well, it's very tricky. When I say Common Sense 101, what I'm talking about is policies that come from an unusual way of thinking known as deductive logic, which rather than being just data crunching and picking facts to support your view, you actually, like in geometry, you deduce solutions from fundamental, commonsensical first principles. Let me give a concrete example. What do you want out of a healthcare system, you and me? Well, I want everyone to be covered. Sound good?
Sure.
Next, I want to be careful I don't use the word access to healthcare. Obama gave us lots of access because you and I now get insurance, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We can call the doctor. That's a problem because the doctors are saying the phones won't answer. We're going out of business when you say that you're going to basically cut what you pay us. So the phones don't answer. So that's a Pyrrhic victory. So my second assumption, the first was I want a lot more people to be able to go to the doctor and have health care. Like Obama, I want that. Number two, I want to make sure that when people ring their doctors, the goods get delivered and the phones are answered. You agree?
Yeah.
That way you don't have rationing and black markets and rich people paying off to get access. I don't like that, and you don't like that. Now, of course, your reaction is going to be, Mr. Brock, that's ridiculous. You want your cake and to eat it too. How can you have that without the country, which is already going broke even faster? So my third requirement is, I want to make sure that the share of GDP, that is the cost of the nation, of having health care, falls by 50%. Now, Mr. Brock, you're smoking. What are you talking about? More for everybody, and you want the total bill of the nation to drop from 19% of GDP, which healthcare is today, to 10? You've got to be joking. The answer is no. Using deductive logic, and it's all spelled out in the book, you can show that actually there is one and only one solution whereby you can have your cake and eat it too. Much more healthcare for half the cost. The answer is to do what the Obamacare thing unfortunately did not do, and that is rather than focusing on the demand side whereby everybody now gets coverage and call the doctor, you focus on the supply side. You have to basically increase supply of services faster than the rate at which their demand grows. I'm making that sound simple. It's easy to do it. But let me repeat. If you do let the supply grow faster than demand, no matter how fast demand grows as you and I get old, the theorem proves the total expenditure will peak and drop eventually to zero, exactly like what has happened to phone calls since you deregulated the monopoly of AT&T.
Mm-hmm. Are we talking about the supply of doctors, the supply of medicines? What are you talking about?
Everything. I'm being more abstract. I have to use the word supply in a loose sense here. We're talking about the supply curve, as they call it in textbooks. And it has to do with things like deregulation, boosting innovation, automated doctors, more productivity, just what you got out of banking, telephones, and everything except medical in this country.
Why are we bogged down in the medical area? Why haven't we adopted the telephone, the telecommunications model?
The answer is, why did not AT&T do these things until it was busted up?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have a monopoly, it's cozy-wozy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Why go innovate and change the way you do things when there's no necessity? Remember what Mother used to teach you? Necessity is the mother of invention. Well, once you had the 8 baby bells or 6 baby bells plus the other 2 that replaced the monopoly of AT&T, suddenly you had massive innovation, technology kicked in, and now your kids are making phone calls 1/10 the cost of what you and I did when we were young. Absolutely the same should apply to medicine. 90% of why all your listeners go to the doctor is for reasons that the nurse knows so well she can give you the prescription before you saw the doctor. They're called routine. Sound familiar?
Sure.
It all ought to be done by an expert system, automated. At 4 in the morning, you go into Walmart, sit in a room, they take your test, they do this, they do that. You're getting the best expert help on earth encoded into expertise on a screen. It tests you. It tells you here's the prescription. It's looking for ways in which you are irregular. And if it sees them, it'll tell you what doctor to see in your zip code and print out all the phone numbers. Total cost, $4.50, not $400. That's what should be done. With competition, it could be done easily.
Well, we're starting to see a little bit of that. You walk into your local drugstore, and they have a physician's office right there. For a much smaller amount, you can get treated for these common ailments. Isn't that a sign of some kind of market-based change?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. It is just getting 30 years late.
Mm-hmm.
Crisis is that 24% of physicians are going to retire in the next 20 years, just as the number of Woody Brocks who are getting old explodes. So the tragedy with the president's health care plan, which I think was unnecessary, and I'm very critical of it, is while it focused on the need for access and more demand for health care, it was completely blind to supply. Now, with all due respect, that is Common Sense 101, correct?
Correct.
There you go.
The book is American Gridlock, Why the Right and Left Are Both Wrong, Common Sense 101 Solutions to the Economic Crises. The author online with me right now is Dr. Woody Brock. In your book, you write about the deficit, the spending deficit, and one of the issues you bring up.
Huge misunderstanding.
Yes,
that.
you
Huge.
bring up that there's a delineation. There's a good deficit and there's a bad government deficit.
Absolutely.
And we need to understand the difference so we can frame the discussion in a common sense way. Take a moment to explain that.
Very simple. I've just been in Australia. From Australia up to the North Pole, everywhere deficit is a dirty word. Government cannot run deficits. So we're living in the age of austerity. Everyone's trying to cut their deficits. The result is right now the lowest level of growth of its kind in 50 years. Okay? Deficits are bad. Wrong. What this country needs is a Marshall Plan, a Rebuild America Plan, huge in scope, involving lots of more government borrowing for infrastructure. But the difference is, and this is the crucial point, suppose when you do what I'm talking about, you have a special bank with very highly paid people who are uncorruptible to analyze all those bullet trains and electric grids that we need. And for every project, a number is computed, which is its rate of return on capital. If you only invest in the particular set of bullet trains or electric grids or new bridges that have a high rate of return on capital, then when you run a deficit and borrow money for things that are profitable, as was the interstate highway system, not to mention the moonshot, the bond market loves you. There's no worry about you sinking into debt at all, because the very spending of the borrowed money is on projects that make you money, more than you spent. Bad deficits are what we have been doing for 40 years, borrowing just to pay income support and keep you and me at our jobs. Nothing more. Because what happens then is you aren't making any return on the capital, and the money that you've borrowed and floated bonds for is sitting in the lap of the children to be paid off by them.
Mm-hmm.
That is what the bond market worries about.
Yeah, it seems to me, though, that one of the weaknesses of that idea is that often you can't see what the future return will be. For instance, you mentioned the moonshot. Who knew, I think, that it was the explosion of technology and innovation that came from that. That was, I think, obvious in hindsight. And yet, I think perhaps those who were counting beans at the time and trying to figure this out would not have seen the benefit of that.
Well, this is certainly true, but there's a problem here. The branch of economics that you use for this is known as the economics of uncertainty. It was invented by a man named Kenneth Arrow, who's probably the most distinguished living theoretical economist on earth. One of the very first Nobel Prize winners, and also was very involved in my doctoral work earlier on. He would point out that when Johnson & Johnson every year has 20 R&D projects, it doesn't have a clue which of them are going to pay out or not, but it calculates their expectation under uncertainty. Now, when you're spreading your money over a large bunch of products, or ventures, or bullet trains, you're never, as you say, going to know which one's going to yield exactly what. But you have a good idea of the probability. And when you then average that over 700 projects, you're absolutely fine.
Mm-hmm.
That overcomes what you're worried about. It's known as optimal risk spreading, or risk pooling for society.
Mm-hmm. In your discussion, you talk quite often about government and this idea of the onion as the metaphor, peeling the onion and looking at kind of corrupt crony capitalism, crony politics.
No.
But what's underneath that, the outer layer of the onion, is something sweet and something still vital. Talk to us about that.
Very, very important point. When you look at the behavior of bankers and what they got away with, aren't you mad as hell?
Yeah.
I think we all are. The point there is this. People who aren't very educated in this, and incidentally, why should people be educated in this? Look at that and say, capitalism isn't very good anymore. It's just making the rich richer. You hear it every day. Everybody forgets something. Think of the entire economy, not just people on Wall Street with these wacko products, but who makes your underwear, your sheets, your beds, your cars, your cable TVs, your electronic personal assistants. Go right down the list. Most of those products that you and I buy are produced under very competitive conditions where there's a huge emphasis on innovation, and every year you get basically a better TV for less money. Sound familiar?
Yep.
So 80% roughly of what we call the economy or business are doing what the old philosopher Adam Smith said, and that is under lots of competition, they're all forced to innovate and compete to try to have an edge over someone else.
The invisible hand.
Absolutely. The invisible hand pushing competition out of which you and I get better products for less. 4 billion of us every year buy better products for less. This is what causes rising living standards. Nobody listening is going to say that's not a good thing. We all want that. That's apple pie and motherhood. The problem is you don't ever think about that because all you see is Goldman Sachs ripping off someone or some other cartel. And so I think we must be very careful if we're going to criticize, quote, capitalism. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm-hmm.
You want to keep what's good about really competitive entrepreneurial capitalism while curtailing these crazy practices, permitting banks to get away with what they have.
You talk about the invisible hand becoming the invisible fist.
The visible fist.
The visible fist. What
Sure,
is that?
Adam Smith, who gave us all of our new concepts of economics back in 1776, when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith was absolutely clear about this. He said, quote, in effect, the greatest threat to the Commonwealth is for the rich and powerful to congregate in the middle of the reception hall to conspire to suppress the competition of the many. In other words, we gang, we lucky few, we Putins, we oligarchs, will screw everybody else. We're the insiders. We've got the power. In Adam Smith's model, no one had power. Literally, it is now a mathematical theorem. No one can have bargaining power to gang up with you or me and hurt someone else. It's basically bargaining neutral in that sense. This is known as the invisible hand, where you go out in the morning and I go out and we take prices as given and we do the best we can to buy the right inputs to make our pies with or to buy the best mix of foods to take home at dinner. We are basically not ganging up with or colluding with anybody. Contrast that to the shenanigans of these Wall Street firms, rigging the LIBOR rate, short selling against their own mortgage products.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing all the kind of things we've been reading about. That's the visible fist of people with a lot of money who go to Washington and let K Street basically bribe government officials. Or Putin in Russia with his visible fist of turning off the gas in the Ukraine to make them play political ball.
Mm-hmm. And to your thinking, from what you've read, it's the cause of the demise of civilizations.
Well, that's a much bigger statement,
Mm-hmm.
much bigger. It is true that people like Monker Olson, who've done very good work on why empires always come to an end, do show that as you become rich and powerful over time, these special interest groups, K Street lobbyists, they get their teeth in deeper and deeper and deeper. And there are so many of these special groups that you end up with nobody being left to represent you and me, what we call the all-player coalition of all the citizens. So every special group has its lobbyists working for it. But who is working for you and me? Nobody. Because we're not writing the checks to get them reelected. The answer to this is you cannot allow, basically, the kind of funding of elections that we now have. Disaster.
And maybe because we are also so polarized that we are now involved in the dialogue of the deaf.
Yep, it's all part and parcel of the same.
The book is American Gridlock, Why the Right and Left Are Both Wrong, Common Sense 101 Solutions to the Economic Crisis. The author and my guest, Dr. Horace Woody Brock. Thank you so much. Quite interesting, Dr. Brock. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.